Hello and welcome. Today, I wanted to delve a little bit more into our world building series. Now, it's been a few days since I've actually come on and done one of these things, but it has been churning away in the back of my mind. I was thinking, well, what can I talk about? And I did make a couple of notes, but then it occurred to me, why don't I talk about clothing? Clothes are how we express ourselves. They're practical, functional, decorative for various occasions. And sometimes they're entirely impractical. So let's look at our world. And of the two main kingdoms, empires, oligarchies, call them what you will, we have two distinct continents. Actually, there's more than that, but we'll get to those as we develop the world. But in the magical kingdom, we have the elves, and we have the dwarves, and we have the humans. And in the non-magical kingdom, we have humans. And there might be some dwarves there too, maybe even some elves who are stranded. They were brought down. Maybe they were integrated. So maybe in the non-magical kingdom, the elves would become second-class or third-class citizens. Maybe they would be enslaved or used as cheap labor. But I don't really know if I want to go with human supremacy at the moment. The only reason that the elves would be treated that way is because the elves are pro-magic. Maybe the dwarves of the non-magical kingdom would be given high status because they use magic, but perhaps it's not quite the same magic that the humans were used to. But we'll talk about that later. I still have to make some decisions on that. But let's discuss their clothing. And currently, both kingdoms are at an industrial period. So we have science fantasy. And on the one hand, the non-magical kingdom is looking a little more, dare I say, gaslit fantasy, possibly steampunk, maybe a bit of oil punk. But it's certainly not your high medieval fantasy. Whereas on the other hand, with the magical kingdom, it's pretty much high fantasy plus steampunk or gaslit fantasy. Now, there's this one little invention called the loom, which changed the course of human history. Absolutely, it changed the course of human history because it allowed cloth to be mass produced. And before that time, cloth was very expensive. And yes, you had spinning wheels and then you had the hand bobbers. And you had to comb it out and it took time. And so cloth was expensive, at least in Western Europe. And with cloth being expensive, there comes a certain consideration, shall we say. We also have to take into account the climate. And at this point, I haven't actually determined what the climate will be. But I am thinking it would be some kind of temperate Mediterranean with a splash of tundra in. So maybe they have quite cold winters and they have moderate to hot summers. Of course, that has been done. Everything has been done. But I think it would be interesting to not play around with the temperatures too much. I like having harsh, cold winters and summers that aren't too sweltering because it provides variety. And with that variety, it allows us to explore clothing. So, what purpose does the clothing serve? Well, if it's hot, you're not going to want to wear too many layers. You're going to want some protection from the sun, but you're not going to want to be sweltering. Likewise, in the winter, you're going to want to wear a lot of layers. But if cloth is expensive, how do you demonstrate your wealth? Well, one way of doing that is to have a lot of cloth, such as robes. And so robes can be quite heavy, or at the very least, they can use a lot of material. But there's also a practical element too, because robes can keep you warm in the winter. And the more layers you have, the warmer you're going to be. And so I think that cloaks should be fashionable. And I think that they should be fashionable because during the winter, you're going to want to keep the snow off, or at least the icy wind. And so it would be an additional layer. So those with money will have thick cloaks. And during the summer, they will have quite thin cloaks to keep the rain off. And I think that we're going to have quite a lot of rain during the summer. And so we'll see a lot of summer storms. So the cloaks will act as practical outer protection. And I think that pretty much everybody is going to have a cloak. But then what will we have? Well, tunics are easy to make, robes are easy to make, trousers are easy to make. And dresses equally are easy to make. But if it's too hot, you're not going to want to be wearing trousers. So I think this will probably be a male and female thing. And I think in terms of practicality, during the summer, they won't be wearing trousers. So instead, what they'll do is they will wear some kind of dress for the ladies and maybe some type of tunic for the men. And I think that those who work in the fields and those who work in the factories, because they're doing manual labor, they will be wearing tunics, and these can be cut down to the knee. And I think the dresses will also look similar. They'll probably be cut down to the knee as well. So what is the difference between the classes? Well, those who don't work, they will have floor-length robes or dresses. And the reason for this is they don't need to move around as much. And so they're showing that they can afford more cloth. But more than that, they are showing quite directly that because they don't need to move as much, they don't need to leave as much skin exposed. So rather than showing off more skin, it's going to be a mark of wealth to show less. And this is going to lead to some rather ridiculous outfits. So the more cloth you have, the wealthier you are. And the less skin you show, the wealthier you are. And this is going to become very impractical. And so people are going to be hiring, at some point, people to walk behind them and carry their train, whether it's a train of the robe or the train of a dress. And just to demonstrate more wealth, the rich will have their robes or their dresses to fit the male or female figure, because the lower classes more or less have unisex tunics. And in imitation of this, the lower classes will be wearing sashes or belts, and this will make it a little more form-fitting. And so the dress will emerge from the tunic. And likewise, the masculine form will also emerge, because fashion comes in cycles, and people are always looking for a way to show off their wealth. And this will happen in both the magical and non-magical kingdoms. And what will happen is we're going to start seeing a form of doublet or jacket suit showing up. So from centuries before, where it was just a robe and there was some kind of cloak, this will be replaced by a jacket. And there'll be a male and a female jacket, because tailoring it to the human form or elf form or dwarf form will be a sign of prestige. And of course, there'll be different dyes, and there'll be different embroidery, and there'll be different stripes or banding or various quilting, different ways of manipulating the material, partly for practical reasons, but also to show off. And so I think that this is how the world will develop. And by the time we hit this industrial era with the loom and automated, magically powered looms, I think that cloth will be so widespread that things are going to take a drastic U-turn. And instead of it being more cloth to show that you are wealthy, I think it's going to be less cloth. And I think that at this point, the tailors are going to start trimming things down. So rather than bulky, wide, billowing, it will be tight, it will be trim. And that this has been the way fashion has been going for centuries because of the male and female. But now practicality has sort of flown out the window. It's still there, but to really demonstrate that you now have power and wealth, everything is going to be trim and everything's going to be cut and it's going to be crisp with sharp lines and sharp edges. And so all of the excess material was thrown out because it's no longer a mark of wealth. And instead, they're going to focus on the finest materials. So a jacket will have lining. And I think that rather than just have a three-piece suit, we will have trim robes with a jacket and hats. I think hats will always have played a role in society, this society. And different hats will suggest where you are in society. And it's not so much someone has to wear it, so much as a social uniform that anybody can tell you where you belong to from a hat. And I think at some point that will be thrown out. So I'm going to have a think about what kind of hats they might wear. But I'm thinking that the nobility would have some kind of fan behind their head. And maybe some kind of headband studded with gems to crown them, so to speak. And I think that this will be taken from the imagery of the phoenix. And I think that the phoenix will be very powerful as the original council of oligarchs. I think that they will use motifs, heraldry, and the phoenix and the griffin maybe will be one of them. Mythical creatures who are perhaps not so mythical since griffins exist. And because fire is something that separates mankind from animals, I think that the imagery of the phoenix will be to suggest that the bird, like the eagle, soars high above the world and looks down upon it. And fire sets mankind apart from the animals. And so when you pair this together, the royalty is saying, we soar high above everybody else, and it is our fire that kindles civilization. The light of civilization comes from our fire, our hearth. And from our fire, so we are set apart. And so the phoenix becomes an important symbol. And so the phoenix has tail feathers. And so they have some kind of fan, which looks like the tail feathers of the phoenix, behind their head. And then they have gems along the headband to signify wealth and status. Now, they don't crown themselves because that would be a little too, shall we say, on the nose. Ostentatious. So they will have a headband with gems. They'll have a fan behind their heads, and they will wear dresses or robes with some kind of mantle or cloak. And that'll be the style for centuries. up until the point where they decide to start trimming these things in. So instead of having billowing robes, they'll have tight robes, trim dresses. And so more shoulders and necks will be shown. But not too much, because too much would be vulgar. And so we might have a few plunging necklines, but only to show off the necklaces and the other forms of wealth. And so I think this will be the clothing of both kingdoms, and there'll be regional variations. There'll be colors, there'll be quilting, there'll be pattern, herringbone, for example, and different patterns and different colors will signify different things, but mostly it will signify wealth. And I think that for centuries, undyed cloth or bleached cloth, which would be white or brown, would be the norm. And so the nobility and the royalty, they would be wearing reds and blues and yellows, possibly not purples, but certainly colors which hold their dye. And when synthetic dyes or magically enhanced dyes come along, there'll be an explosion of color. And at that point, the nobility will drift towards grays and blacks and whites. Whereas before they used a lot of color, now they're going monochrome because they want to step away from the common rabble, so to speak, in their eyes. And so that will be the clothing that we have in our two kingdoms. And that will conclude today's video, and we will keep working on this in the upcoming days. I hope that this has given you plenty of ideas for your own stories. Fashion is very important because it is how we express ourselves. And there are many, many different things to take into consideration for it. I think that we'll also look at stockings and tights and garters and girdles and gloves and sleeves which are attached and sleeves which are not attached, and accessories. Shoes will also be very important in this society. Yeah, I think that's pretty much everything. I think that I will create some kind of silk, and probably from earth silkworms or similar ones. Do you know that there is a silkworm that doesn't actually need to die to produce silk? There is. Go and take a look. It's fascinating. I think that they will probably spin silk from flowers and a worm which lives inside a flower. And I'll name these later. And I think that silk and cotton, very, very high quality cotton, will be the mainstay materials. Anyway, that's all for today. If you like the video, do leave a like, do leave a comment. It's great to know what you guys are thinking. It's great to know if it's been helpful. Do subscribe, share it with a friend. And if you would like to learn how to write, or at least increase your writing, do get in touch with me. I'd love to have a chat with you. Join our Discord group. We'd love to see you there. Anyway, have an amazing day. Happy writing. See you guys later.